Hello, and welcome to Innovative's December 2017 Hot Topic, Mindful Leadership Basics, with our invited feet-on-the-street expert, Kym Cadle of Pure Ambition, myself, Nanette Knott, III's Senior Product Manager of Metadata, as your session moderator today, and my colleague from Services, Ann Talley, III Senior Consultant, as your chat moderator. Before we go any further, let's put some faces with these names. I'm Nanette, the photo on the far left, and that's Kym, our main presenter today in the center, and Ann on the far left. I can't say it right, I've got two lefts. So I'm on the far left, Ann's on the far right. And before I turn the session over to Kym, let's just hit a couple of logistics for today. This is session one of our two-part conversation on mindful leadership, a success process for leading your library through this time of great change. First and foremost, we're hoping as much as possible in the webinar format to make this a conversation. Kym has several polls, and you'll see that Ann is chatting them out, and they'll be interspersed throughout today's session. We'll also be chatting out a question from time to time and ask that you respond to us in chat. Ann and I will then bring your responses and questions into the conversation with Kym as we move forward. So please feel free to chat any questions as they arise, and Ann and I will collate them and bring them in at moments of pause. We ask that you please respond to the polls and chat questions as they're sent out, and in your chat box, check all panelists or host and all panelists. That will make sure that both Ann and I get them. And then also don't hesitate to chat to either one of us individually with technical difficulties should any arise, and we'll get you the answers. So before we dive into our session outline, let's just take a quick note to let you know that we are recording today's session, and you'll be receiving an email from the three of us as presenters before week's end. This email will contain a link to today's recorded presentation on the Innovative YouTube channel. And just a reminder, you can find all of our current and past hot topics recorded, both sessions 1 and 2, on the Innovative YouTube channel. You'll also have in that email our contact information, so don't hesitate to send us a link or feedback. A link also to register for session 2 if you haven't already registered for the second half of this hot topic. And finally, a survey evaluation form that we hope you'll take a minute to complete to let us know how we're doing and what else you'd like to see. As to today's session, per the hot topics format, as you can see on the slide, Kym will be focusing on debunking myths and basic principles of mindful leadership. And she'll follow on next week with how to get started with mindful leadership for yourself and in your team. Before we go any further, let's make sure our webinar conversation facilities are working with this practice chat. Please pass us a question or note a topic that you're hoping we'll cover today, and Ann will bring those into the conversation. I see we already have some chats going to the first poll. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. And I just want to give you one final thought before I pass the session over to Kym and we dive into mindful leadership. As this slide says, you might be asking yourself why Innovative is investing in hot topics. And thankfully, the answer here is pretty simple. It's so simple, in fact, that you might be tired of hearing those of us at Innovative saying it. I know that Jim, our CEO, speaks about it. Someone like me from Product talks about it, and Ann from Services. Because we all truly believe, as your library success partner, we're in this together. And we're together at the moment, as this quote on this slide notes, at a very special time in library. A special, risky, and sometimes somewhat scary time with all the new stuff being introduced. A time when, more than ever, we all need a helping hand. And ideally, a helping hand we can afford. So much the better if, like these hot topics, it's a substantive training, a substantive help that's also free. So to answer the why hot topics and why now questions, because it's what you should expect from us, your library success partner. It's our way of learning together and helping us all move forward together. So why mindful leadership? I'll go to a personal answer here. Because leadership and the stresses of change, both positive and negative, is personal. And for me, I learned early in my career, and please note, I don't give myself too much credit for being a fast learner. I didn't learn mindful leadership and its advantages through any great epiphany of my own. As I said, it's personal. I learned about mindful leadership at about the age of 30 when I went into the hospital from stress at work, and they put a tube down my nose into my stomach and told me to walk away and live my normal life for 3 days. Just go about normal business, attend all your meetings, see clients, because what they wanted to do was measure the impact of the stress and activities of work on my stomach. You don't have to be a very fast learner. You look different now, and it's not very pleasant to immediately decide there has to be a better way to learn. There has to be a better way to learn change. And that's when I came to this. I didn't at the time call it mindfulness. I thought about it as something along the lines of stress reduction and centering, but it worked for me. And over the years and throughout the course of my career leading technical change in the knowledge life cycle, working with SMEs, subject matter experts, be it at the publisher side or in libraries or as a consultant or as an SME myself, I've honed the skill of mindful leadership and made it a part of my day-to-day life and work. So when assigned the job of it defining our Hot Topics curriculum, and please note this curriculum is also associated with our boot camp series of in-depth trainings on these areas, and there will be an upcoming mindful leadership boot camp as well. I was thrilled to meet Kym and be introduced to her and find a way to bring these practices I use in my day-to-day life of managing technical change in the knowledge life cycle over the past 20 years to the community of library, and to have Kym bring her business and skills from other worlds outside library to us at this time of great change, and a time when we're increasing our leadership responsibilities on all of this as we help our libraries, our institutions, and our individual patrons navigate the increasingly complex knowledge and learning environment. So without further ado, Kym, I'm excited to have you join us, and I turn the session over to you.
Thanks, Annette. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you sharing your personal story. I think it helps give context to everything we're up to today, especially you coming from the library world and me coming from a different background. So much appreciated. And before we get into depth on mindful leadership basics, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my background. I'm really thrilled to be here with you guys, and I really appreciate the time that you're taking out of your days, making time to focus on your leadership skill set. And we're going to be really looking at how that's going to empower you to do the work and meet the demand of the change that you're in the midst of. Myself personally, I'm a certified coach. And the reason that I decided to get my coaching credentials because I really find that a great lever in organizations in the greater world is to empower conscious leaders at all levels of organizations. Typically, coaching is reserved for higher level executives, and part of my mission in the world is to bring coaching and mindful concepts to everyone, because when everyone's empowered, the system can move much more quickly and with much more agility. So we're going to be looking at that today. And really, it's all about bringing mission, vision, and values forward and intrinsic motivators. So if we can be connected to our mission, the organization's mission, our personal vision for our lives, and connecting that to the organization's vision, our personal values, connecting to organizational values, things just get much easier and less scary, as Annette was mentioning. It's a kind of an interesting time for libraries. I'm also a lifelong volunteer. I love to cook, travel, and read. And I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. Most of my time is spent hiking and kayaking and really reconnect. And I could say it's where I And it's really, when I say that, what do I mean? It's I retreat, I reflect, I recharge, I return to myself. I'm able to hit a reset button, rediscover, refuel, and really re-energize. And so there is a lot to be said for taking time out of these stressful work environments that many people end up in hospitals because of these days, and really hit that reset button. I'm also the creator of the Mindful Leadership Model, which is what this is all about, and I'm working on the Mindful Leaders Playbook so I can bring this work make it more accessible to folks in the world so that people can practice these principles without me being in the room with them. So with that said, Anne, I know that you did a poll about who's in the room. Can you share some of the titles that we have represented with us today?
Yeah, certainly can. We have a variety of librarians with us this morning. We have librarians from academic, public, and special libraries. They're covering the areas of technical services and cataloging, public services, as well as library directors. And we have some circulation managers with us today. So I think we have most of the major areas of any type of library within our group today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I really want to share that I view your role as, you know, all those different roles that Ann just shared is incredibly impactful. And some of my most vivid memories in life really happened in libraries, as well as my deepest learnings. So as our culture shifts, it's really interesting to pay attention to how libraries are shifting. So it's really exciting for me to partner with Innovative and you all because it is a crucial time. And my work really is about helping you all achieve your mission and make the impact you seek to make in the world. So thank you for being here. And I think we wanted to shoot out a chat or Nanette around what you all see as your most important priority. So there's a couple options there, whether it's community engagement, continuous learning, innovating for today's digital environments, multi-stakeholder cross-functional leadership, effective project management, fundraising. What are you guys seeing as your most important roles?
And Kym, that chat did go out, so we were just awaiting responses, and it ties into several of our earlier questions. Remember, the earlier chat asked them for topics that they might be interested in seeing covered today, and so this list of priorities mails very nicely with some of the information that they put in, because as I mentioned, we have library directors, we have people who are interested in change management, we have leaders who are working with volunteers who want to know how to be both a co-worker and a leader. So as we're chatting their responses, and they're beginning to come in.
Wonderful. And if you could, we can just pop into these. I want to make sure I hit these for sure as we go through the content and make it personal for all of you. And I think that's something really important as we go through. 2 hours is a long time to hold your attention, so our goal really is to make this interactive and kind of keep us moving along. So Nanette's going to be participating with me, and we will be pushing out polls and chats consistently throughout our time together. So debunking the myths, I think many of you have been to these hot topics before, and they follow kind of a certain cadence. And so for mindful leadership especially, there's a lot of myths out there that I want to make sure that we touch on and debunk. The first is that mindfulness is meditation. So we'll be talking about the core differences there. Mindfulness is a fad is another myth, and some common language I hear frequently. Mindfulness is a soft skill, and soft skills are nice to have, not must-have. So we'll be talking about how critical it is considering the times that we're in. And kind of leveraging off that, many might look at mindfulness and technology as being exclusive of one another and not going together. So we're going to be talking about how they kind of can coexist and what happens when we allow for that. So let's start with that first myth. Mindfulness is meditation. And when we think about meditation, this is kind of the ideal state that people have in their minds, that we're sitting in a perfect posture with our hands perfectly aligned. If we're by a body of water, that might add to the experience. A stack of beautifully balanced rocks, and we might figure that that's utopia. And the reality is that mindfulness and meditation are different things. Meditation is a practice that allows us to build our muscles around mindfulness, but it's not mindfulness in and of itself. You may have heard of mindful meditation. Again, that is a practice that helps us allow for more mindfulness in the moment. So this is a tool to build muscles and train the brain to be a more mindful leader in the moment. So if we really want to talk about what mindfulness is, excuse me, a little frog in my throat, it's really, we can look at it as being akin to being immersed in a book. So I want you guys all to think about a book that you just can't put down. You are in contact with that book. You're relating to that book. You're not meditating, right? You are fully present to the content. And what I think is really key here as well when we think about this is even the characters that we don't necessarily like or care for in a really good book, we are completely curious about, interested in, and waiting to see what's going to happen next, right? We don't close the book and put it to the side. We stay with it to let the story emerge. So I think this is a great metaphor for us to hold as we go through this. We're thinking about mindfulness. Let's think about being immersed in a book. We're really connected with ourselves at that point. We're open and curious. We have connection with other, again, those characters that we're reading about and letting emerge. We're fully engaged. We're focused, fully present. And let's take it a step further. You know, mindfulness is also emotional intelligence. And so as a chat, I think we're curious to see where you guys are in terms of emotional intelligence and what your knowledge is and connection. If we look at the definition of mindfulness, it's the intentional, accepting, and non-judgmental focus of one's attention on the emotions, thoughts, and sensations occurring in the present moment. So that's the definition that we hold when we refer to mindfulness at my company, Pure Ambition. To get really clear, intentional, accepting, non-judgmental focus. And if we look at emotional intelligence, also known as EQ, the emotional side versus intellectual intelligence, IQ, it's the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. So there's some great crossover here between these two definitions that I think is really important to note. And Anne, were you able to put that chat out just to see where the group is?
It is. The chat is up. We're asking for their awareness of or connection with the mindfulness and emotional intelligence. And we put up just three or four possible options. I do apologize for having 2 3s in the chat. I'm from Alabama, so I guess that could account for it. But anyway, so we have a couple of options. And so the answers are coming in. We have several who are aware of the concepts and understand the impact. There are some that are aware of the concept and they're curious about the impact. And then we have those who are aware and are actually practicing the concepts. So do continue to chat 1, 2, 3, or 4, and we'll pass those along to Kym. Yep.
Beautiful. Great. So it sounds like we have a nice cross-section. And if we go back to some of the topics that folks are looking for, the next level chat would be a question about when you look at these definitions, just how do you see these concepts being in service to your library and to the work that you're doing? You know, just even when you think about change management or volunteer engagement and leadership, what comes up for you guys?
Right. And that's a free-form chat, Kym, that I've also just placed in the window. So we'll wait and see what the responses are to that and maybe how they relate to the options that were selected in the first half of that chat.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. And so what I'll do is I'll check back in with you if there's nothing present right now, Anne.
Okay, certainly. I'm here.
Yep, and let's go. So that's myth number 1. So mindfulness is certainly not a meditation. And the invitation for you all is to connect it with emotional intelligence, which is an incredibly important skill that we'll talk about as we continue to go through these myths. And, you know, just always holding the metaphor that it's like being immersed in a really rich, juicy book. So myth number 2, mindfulness is a fad. And so how do we even know when something's a fad versus having staying power, you know? And so these are just some of the fads that we've seen come and go over time. The current is these fidget spinners. And I love this comic that I think that sums it up nicely is I can't see this fashion for animal patterns lasting much longer. And it's the cavemen who are wearing the loins. So, you know, we really don't know until we see that it sticks around, whether or not it's going to be a fad, right? So let's talk about kind of the history of mindfulness. You know, it really has stood the test of time. And if we go back to just where it comes from, it's really founded and rooted in traditional Buddhism. That is the history of mindfulness, and it's part of the Eightfold Path. It's the foundational part of that path, and it holds space for emotion, speech, livelihood, effort, things of that nature. And so, you know, in traditional times, it was the picture that we saw at the beginning of what meditation looks like. And mindfulness, again, is the meditation allowing for us, too, when we are in relation with other, in relation with ourselves, to be clear-headed, present, curious, judgment-free. When we fast forward a little bit to the 70s, we have these three gentlemen. Daniel Goleman on the left, he is considered the man who popularized emotional intelligence. And then next in, we have Richard Davidson. Daniel and Richard studied together at Harvard University in the 70s and late 60s. And what they asked was to be able to study meditation. And Harvard said, no way, we're not going to fund that, we're not going to let that happen. So what they did was they changed their topic to focus. And then it was funded, and they went to India, and they did a whole bunch of research, and they learned a ton about, again, what does meditation and mindfulness allow for? Emotional intelligence, focus, and presence. And then the other gentleman on the screen here is Kym Cadle, and he is the founder, created the concept of mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is what Nanette was speaking about earlier. So many people are so stressed out in their lives that it really has a adverse effect on our health. I work with people every day that have extreme medical outcomes from the stress that they feel at work. So how can we use mindfulness to help us reduce that stress and, again, then show up more focused and clear? And then we go to today's times, and these lovely young folks have figured out sooner than us. And I love this guy. He goes by Smiley, Adam Paswalski, and he wrote the book, The Quarter Life Breakthrough. Quarter life at 25, how are we finding meaning and purpose and living a life that matters? And there's an interesting study. Well, first of all, I think you guys probably are well aware that, millennials are making up the majority of our population now. By 2020, half the workforce will be millennials. And what's interesting and different about them maybe versus prior generations is they want to do important work, meaningful work. They also want the paycheck to go with it. So they're not going to go volunteer to feed those parts of themselves. They want them to come together and be one. And what's interesting is that 64% of millennials say that they practice dedicated activities to achieve mindfulness. So this is what I was getting at earlier, whether it's yoga, meditation, journaling, or using apps, whereas on the other hand, baby boomers embrace mindfulness by simply being present in their daily lives. But 19% of longer or older generations actually do specific things to build that muscle. So we're learning earlier in life, and probably because, again, technology and this next screen, which shows us the data that we now have. So we have increasing research to back up the benefits of these practices. And I love that the hockey stick here is so clear on what's emerged over the last 16 years in our ability to study the brain, which is a lot of this is based on brain science, neuroscience. And so now that we have the data, it's hard to argue when we have data, right? I think all of us understand that. So what I want to suggest and present to you is that mindfulness is not a fad, it's actually mainstream. And, we can get into semantics here, and I think some people think that mindfulness has kind of been hijacked for something opportunistic, and really if we get back to the roots and the real desire behind it, to have people show up more conscious and connected and doing meaningful things versus reactionary, and we can start to let go of some of those tendencies to create associations with the word that maybe are less positive. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But I love this picture. So that's Anderson Cooper. Probably all recognize him in the middle there meditating. So 60 Minutes did a great piece on mindfulness. Time Magazine did a whole magazine dedicated to mindfulness and the new science of health and happiness. And what I really love, the trend that's happening in the world that is becoming more a norm, is children in schools meditating. And they started some experiments in middle city schools across the country. These happen to be children in Baltimore, Maryland, that instead of going to the principal's office or detention, they're sent to the mindful moment room. And what this does, it just allows them a moment to process what's happening, how they're feeling. I liken it to hitting a pause button. And instead of having a negative consequence, right? You know, so I'm not going to do this behavior because there's a negative consequence. We're not really changing how we're responding to situations. So by allowing them to take a moment to process, now they can think next time differently about their choice because they've actually processed it. And these kids come from really chaotic lives, so I think it's really interesting and important to note that having this allows them a space to maybe have quiet the only time of their day. And what they're finding is that bullying and incidents are reduced significantly, violence and bullying in particular, when we are bringing mindfulness into the school system. And Annette, I think you had some thoughts on how this all relates to libraries and some other things that you're seeing happening.
Sorry, I was on mute.
That's okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. The old mute button.
Yeah, I had it is mainstream. So one of the ways for us as persons working in library ourselves is we can be, as a service professionals, bombarded by 100 questions, and then we don't do our jobs quite as well. So there's remembering to give ourselves that mindful moment to step away into a quiet space to recenter, so that as a service professional, and I've done it as a consultant, so that I can be really focused in the patron's question and the patron's problem and their information-seeking behavior instead of my stress to get an answer to them quickly or to help them.
Beautiful.
The other place, yeah, I think that's not what I said in practice, but as I was listening to you today, it's like, wow, that's the one I'm really doing right now. So I'll stick with that one, I guess.
Anything on the medical, nursing, or education connections?
Yes, and why am I not pulling it up? I think those are moments where we're actually, in libraries, embedded. So that's in the medical and the education areas, we're embedded librarians, and we have the stress then of helping the clinicians who are, or the practitioners who are responding to the patrons directly or working with the patrons. So I think this just makes that even more, it makes mindfulness even more applicable in those faster-paced environments. We don't talk about that very much, but as we get embedded, it's not just the speed of library, then it's the speed of the place that we're embedded. And medicine and education can move fast. Your Baltimore Schools example is perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. So hopefully we've debunked the myth that mindfulness is just a fad. We've shown it over centuries, and it's just becoming more and more present, and no pun intended. But we're in the process of crossing this chasm to normalcy. And one of the things that's interesting is I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. My company, Pure Ambition, has been around for 6 years. About 5 years ago, I really realized that mindfulness is the path to creating the cultures that I think people deserve to be working in, where they can thrive. And, you know, at that point, 5 years ago, it was really edgy for me to say mindful in a business context. And now here we are 5 years later, and people see it as opportunistic. And so I want to just talk a little bit about that, because this comes up for people, and I won't talk too much about it, but just briefly that Thich Nhat Hanh, who is he's considered the Zen master, and he is a monk, and he has Plum Village in France, and he actually meditated at the World Bank Forum with all these financial leaders, and he received real significant criticism for that, because the thought was that these world leaders, and especially in the financial world, are only doing this for some financial end or gain, and it's still greed-based behavior. So we're taking something and we're kind of dirtying it, if you will. And what he said is that it really doesn't matter what the original intention is. It could be that you want to have higher performance or make a bigger paycheck or whatever you see as the path. But once you start practicing it, it's impossible not to shift. It's impossible not to shift. And so my own story, much like Nanette's, is that I was in a really stressful work environment, and my kind of authentic self was being coached out of me. It was more of a fear-based leadership style that my leadership was looking for. And so I started to do some numbing behaviors and absencing so I could get through those situations. And I then had been hearing about meditation, had never practiced it. This was probably 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And I just decided to start, just seeing what would happen. And it was challenging at first to really get centered and present and focused, because when things become stressful, what we want to do is absence from them, right, and avoid it and distract and move into denial. But getting present was really challenging for me. But the more and more I did it, the more and more I was able to connect with my authentic self again and say, wait a minute, hold up. This isn't who I am. This isn't how I want to be in the world as a leader. I have a choice. And so by practicing it just to get through the day, it actually ended up changing the whole trajectory of my life. So I think there's something, too, regardless of your original intent, once you're in it, it just opens up possibilities that you couldn't imagine beforehand. So we're going mainstream with it. That's the point. Myth number 3, mindfulness is a soft skills, and soft skills are nice to have, not must-haves. And so I think we're going to put out a chat on this about some beliefs, and perhaps some of these statements are familiar to you when you want to do leadership training or invest in kind of these softer skills. First, it's hard to assess the ROI. We might hear that we have other priorities right now. Touchy-feely doesn't belong in the workplace, and the skills really touchy-feely. These types of skills are not mission critical, like technical knowledge. And the one that is most frequent that I hear is that we're in the midst of a change, the timing will be better when, ... And, what I say about that is the time to invest in leadership competencies is now, because we're never going to have the time. Simply put, we will never have the time. We have to make time to invest in these skills. So I'm curious who can relate to these statements in the net, if you have any experience with this in the library system, and any thoughts you want to add?
Yeah, I see that we've chatted out the question. I'm sure Ann will chime in as we get some answers. I think, those two on the far right, it's hard to assess ROI, and we have other priorities. It's easy to focus on the system skills or, those things that we can get done and check off our list, but it's amazing when we start applying these techniques to the service side of what we do, and we bring ourselves to the interaction instead of getting ourselves out of the way. As you were talking, I was thinking about that's how I've changed, It's not get myself out of the way so I can be a blank slate, but it's bring myself into the interaction so I'm talking person to person, and especially with information-seeking behavior, that person has come to the library and they have a need for the information, be it they were just diagnosed with cancer or they have a report to write, So they come in for a very specific need, and some of them are highly stressed when they do. It just makes it so much easier when you can work with them person to person. Over time, we serve more patrons and our ROI does go up, but we don't, those are the, hard to measure things, like in nurses, what's the value of a warm blanket? Turns out it's a lot.
Nice.
Making that connection, so.
Thank you. Thank you. And Ann, any responses to the chat question?
And actually, Kym, we actually have a very good response from Andrea, who is a long-term library manager, and she admits that she's never given soft skills much thought, but on the other hand, neither have they been discussed or taught anywhere in her years of being in management. So I think this is one of the reasons we're here today. Now, Trevor has chimed in about the technical skills aspects of it, and he says that technical skills can be learned, and those are the ones where you can it's easier to gauge the aptitude. So if someone has soft skills, he considers those soft skills to be valuable when creating a solid team. So we actually had good responses to both the soft skills side of the question and the hard skills or technical skills on that.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, so do keep them coming in. And they're all tying in, Kym, by the way, with the earlier chats about the topics that people were interested in today, because we had digital literacy coming in, we had patron services and education. So the discussion you and Nanette had is blending quite well with the expectations from some of our participants today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ann, and I really appreciate both of those perspectives that you shared. Yeah, that's one of the things that they're not really spoken about much. And I think that it's this middle one that people don't say out loud, but touchy-feely doesn't belong in the workplace. That's a story that's been bought into. But then as we also heard is that, you know, these are skills that are highly regarded when we have them in terms of creating strong, effective, high-performance teams. We can teach the technical. We need to also pay as much attention to these as well, which we're going to talk a little bit more now about why that's true or what we know. And first of all, let's debunk the myth. Soft skills are what builds trust in organizations. If you think about people you trust, think about what makes you trust them. And trust is the #1 enabler of success in any organization, family system, any system you look at. If trust is present, you have a much higher likelihood of long-term sustainable success. And I think that's also an important point, is we can get short-term hits through other methods, but if we want long-term sustainable success, the trust has to be there. So Amy Cuddy, she is a professor at Harvard Business School, and she wrote this book, Presence, Bringing Your Boldest Self to Your Biggest Challenges. I highly recommend it. And this quote from her, I think, really speaks to this. And she says, most people, and I'm guessing we can all relate to this, especially in a professional context, believe that competence is the most important factor. After all, they want to prove that they're smart and talented enough to handle your business, handle your attention, really. And we think about people wanting to prove their credibility, their credentials, and leading with that. But in fact, warmth or trustworthiness is the most important factor in how people evaluate you. And really the point is that you lead with the trust, not that competency doesn't matter, but it's not how you build teams, it's not how you build connections, it's not how you get collaborative outcomes. And Amy Cuddy, if you're not familiar, has an amazing TED Talk. It's one of the most watched TED Talks of all time, and it's really focused on how your body language shapes who you are, and this is based on her research at Harvard around energy. And so our body language, you know, we've studied body language for a long time about how you can read other people's body language and the message it gives you on the other side of it, but actually our body language creates a mindset for us while we're in it in our own bodies, and how we can shift those things to shift the energy around us and start to open up, again, these channels for real connection. So I love her work. I think it's really solid and highly recommend you guys taking a look at it. The other thing that we're kind of dancing around a little bit with some of the responses too is that as artificial intelligence takes hold, the demand for these soft skills continues to climb. And so what's really interesting is that for the first time in the late, 2010s, we start to see the demand for social skills increasing and math and science skills decrease in terms of talent acquisition, because machines can do these technical skills just like we can be taught them, right? They're very technical, they're step-driven. Now machines are starting to take that over, whereas these emotional intelligence skills, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how important people are to all of this. And I think it was Elon Musk who said we need to make sure that we stay relevant here, right? It's really critical to pay attention to hone these skills. So this is good not only for your library system, your people that you interact with, but also for your career. These are skills to invest in. So, Ann, I think I just saw you pushed out the Oxford 2015 study that asked what percentage of technical jobs are at risk of automation in the next decade. What did you see come back on that?
Well, the responses are still coming in, Kym, but so far 80% is leading.
80% is leading. Okay, 80%. So you guys are fully aware of this, I would say.
Okay, we now have a vote for 47%, but so far 80% is on out front. So what's interesting about this is that this is a 2013 study, and I probably should go back and see what we have that's more recent. As of 2013, we were looking at 47%. I would guess that it is probably, because we know technology moves fast once it starts, like just think about what's going on with self-driving cars. So, yeah, we probably are heading in that 80% direction as time marches on, right? And so the other thing that's really important when we think about all of this, so there's the artificial intelligence, and then there's also just,
I think it's been mentioned a few times about change, and change is occurring at an unprecedented rate, requiring workforces to be more resilient, agile, and what's really important here is self-directed. So this is Boston Consulting Group, the article that they did, and they're talking about in a manufacturing environment, but we can take this and it applies everywhere, that what we want and really require is that employees are more open and adaptive to change, that they possess greater flexibility, and that they can make their own decisions based in the moment versus waiting for more hierarchical structure, which is what we're used to. And what happens with hierarchical structures, it slows everything down. Well, if you slow down that much, you're going to miss out, right? And so we need to equip everyone in the organization to have the skills to be flexible and respond appropriately. So that's the other reason why these soft skills are not just nice to have, but they're mission critical. So what's the value of this? When we really get to it, so I showed you guys the hockey stick of study. The value of mindfulness on critical soft skills is clear. So there's a ton of studies. On my website, which I'm going to share a link in a moment, you can find a lot of more recent. I like to quote this 2011 study because it covers all of them. And I want you guys, as you're hearing this, to be thinking about the value of this in your library. And I think they're going to push a chat out about this. But if we look at this Journal of Happiness study, mindfulness strengthen the immune system and physiological responses to stress and negative emotions. So think about negative emotions in the workplace, right, and how we respond physiologically. And improve social relationships with family and strangers. I love that, especially when we're in a service industry. We're interacting with strangers all day long. It reduces stress, depression, anxiety, and increased well-being and happiness. We can all get on board with that, I think. It increased openness to experience conscientiousness and agreeableness and reduce negative associations with neuroticism. I think what this is really about is losing that judgment, just like we were talking about in the book. Judgment of other, and the neuroticism is even judgment of self, is what this refers to. And it led to greater psychological mindfulness, clear, non-conceptual, flexible, a practical stance towards reality, which is really critical here. We're not in story, we're in what's really happening, and present attention to ourselves and our awareness. And then the other study I want to, or there's a bunch of studies that I point to on my site, is that speak to innovation and how being mindful, and if you can just think about those 1, 2, 5 bullet points above, how those would allow for a more innovative work environment and how critical that is right now. Right, especially in the world that you're in. And you think about, you know, cab companies failing to innovate. What happened? It allowed Uber and Lyft to move in and make cabs almost obsolete. So if we can tap into these resources and ways to innovate at a new level, what's possible then? So I think we had a poll, and then Nanette, I think you wanted to add to this conversation also.
Yeah, okay. Again, I keep forgetting I'm on mute. Well, personally, that first one, they strengthen the immune system and the physiological responses to stress, right? The good news of the opening story is that I haven't been hospitalized for an autoimmune condition in 20 years. That's a big deal to me, right? When you have that tube down your nose.
And your family and everyone 30. Around you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And interestingly, my job went more into development. Over the same period of time, my job went more into creativeness and innovation and cutting-edge development, or, you know, right at that edge, first in publishing and then moving into library and being behind a national or international initiative called Resource Description and Access that changed cataloging as we do it in libraries. I couldn't have done it without the mindfulness, because when you stop and focus, there's something magic that happens. Yes, it helps you physically, but there's also something magic that happens to creativeness. I would say that what happens is I listen better.
Mm-hmm.
I can understand many different perspectives and get to that diversity. That's a core value of librarianship, and really work with it and work on one, you know, in those high-performing teams where all of those perspectives are coming to play, and together we're developing something new that folks haven't seen. I think that's what many of us are doing, especially as we're embedded or we're within our institutions. Library is sort of that center role. So not just strangers, but in an academic environment, there's many different perspectives coming into that library, and we have to serve them all. It just gives us a new way to listen.
New way to listen. I like that. And to varying perspectives. Well said.
I have one here that came in privately to Marie that says, mindfulness is great for those times when everything's happening at once or when you're working with difficult patrons. It allows librarians to provide great customer service while being present enough to observe what needs to happen for a better user experience. And that came from, I think, yes, it's Marla. One of the things I love, and I think mindfulness, your comment makes me think of too, Marla, is while we're serving people, we're also observing what's going on in the rest of the library, right? Because when you're dealing with the public, you're serving one person and present in that, but you have to be aware of any, we see it in a lot of our magazines right now, any threats or disruptions that are happening on the larger floor that you're a part of. So you have to be able to balance both of those things. It's not really multitasking, but it's
awareness. Yeah, it's in multiple levels.
Awareness, that's the right word. Thank you.
Yeah, nice, great. Nice connection. I really appreciate that perspective. I think that's exactly well said, and we're going to even talk about, the levels of listening and impacts that we have at different levels of the system. Great. Anything else before we move on?
Well, Andrea, the manager, looked at it from the administrative side in a sense, and she actually posed her answer in the form of a question. And it ties in very nicely, I think, with Nanette's story about how she has been not hospitalized for the same condition in over 20 years, because all of this, and Andrea's question was that it should lower health care costs. So again, we're looking at our topic today from various angles and getting different perspectives.
Beautiful. When we think about this, this is a real wellness opportunity for organizations to that point. And so not just from healthcare costs, that's the outcome, right? And then, again, if everybody's well, what's possible? A lot more than when they're stressed out. There's some amazing statistics about stress that we don't get into. So thank you for that, Andrea. Great. So we're going to move into myth number 4 now. Hopefully we've debunked that soft skills are not necessary. I think we've made a good case for that. Myth number 4, technology and left hard skills and mindfulness right soft are exclusive of one another and don't go together. So it's kind of some either or thinking, right? So, what's really important is the analysis, the logic, the facts, the sequencing, the mathematics, and the language. And over here we have, again, that touchy-feely, imagination, creativity side. And I think that we tend to view them as mutually exclusive. And I want to share some data coming from tech companies that is really compelling for me and really important. And the tech companies are actually leaders in tapping into mindfulness for better long-term outcomes. The very companies that are, it's called a race to the bottom of your brainstem, vying for your attention and shortening our attention spans are the ones that are investing the most in mindfulness for their employee populations. And there's a conference here called Wisdom 2.0 in San Francisco every year, and it brings all the tech leaders together with all the mindfulness practitioners. And they call it 2.0 because, remember, we looked at that 8-fold path from Buddhism and its roots, and so that's all well and good in the woman by the water with the rocks meditating, yet today's times call for us shifting and evolving in how we handle this. And so what they're really trying to crack is how do we meet the 24/7 always-on digital world that we're operating in and make space for mindfulness practices, because if we let the pendulum swing too far, we're going to be in trouble. Because we're going to lose kind of what really motivates human beings, and that's connection. So this is a picture of Salesforce.com's annual conference, and here we have Deepak Chopra in the middle, Wayne Dyer, and a holistic doctor on the stage talking about how important these things are. Salesforce.com has a device-free floor in their building. so that people can disconnect from the devices. We all know who that is, Steve Jobs. He did not let his children use devices in his home until a certain age. Here we have at LinkedIn the Dalai Lama meeting with the CEO of LinkedIn on the stage at Wisdom. And then Arianna Huffington has a story much like Nanette. When she was running the Post, she was burned out, and at the end of her, she was just exhausted, and she actually fell. She passed out from exhaustion and broke her nose, I believe, or cut her head open, and that was her wake-up call. And so she's left the Huffington Post and started an organization called Thrive Global after she wrote this book about the third metric and wisdom being so important for us to function, again, in the environments that we're in. So I always, again, say, if those who are leading the way in technology are suggesting this balancing factor, we probably would be well-served to pay attention to that. And so what we're really talking about is, for all the reasons we've discussed, is that, our times are calling for integration. And it's not left versus right. It's left and right integrated. So those are the myths debunked. Now we're going to get into some mindful leadership principles. And we're going to go through two sections for this last space of time. The first is it starts with you, and then we'll move into the model that I referenced at the beginning of the call and what really is the process to get us into this way of being in the workplace and leading from this stance, if you will. So first of all, it starts with you. Hate to break it to you. This is often the hardest thing for people to accept. And the reality is, no matter what roadblocks you face, the path to success is getting this one thing. Things go sideways when we move to victim stances and start pointing fingers everywhere. If we can start within ourselves to practice these things, and when we hold ourselves accountable to our experiences and knowing that we are always in choice, everything shifts. So taking ownership to this, I would say, for all of you, is what I would call the path to freedom. And I think this was touched on earlier, these levels of impact. And every action that we take, getting back to the emotional intelligence principles, has an impact not only on ourselves, but on those around us, and then also on the larger operating system or space. So this is an opportunity to think about cultures. That's that larger operating system. So just knowing that when we are mindless, not only is it affecting kind of ourselves in the absence I was talking about earlier, but the person we're in interaction with is also experiencing it, and you're impacting the culture of the organization or the system that you're in. An example that I like to share is when I come from a corporate background, executive level, and I would literally sit at my desk, someone would come in to speak to me, and I would be typing an email and tell them, I'm listening to you. Keep talking, I'm listening, while I'm doing something else. Not only am I not really hearing anything that's being said at any meaningful level, and that's impacting me, but what is the message I'm sending to that person in my office who wants my attention? And what is the impact of that on the culture? Really important. Another opportunity to really think about this is just think about whether it's a library or a store or anywhere where you walk in and you feel a positive energy vibe. That is an example of the larger operating system having a vibrant, engaged, connected culture, as opposed to when you walk in a library and there's just nothing, or a store, and you can feel either blankness or sometimes you can feel a little negative edge. So those are the things to pay attention to from a leadership perspective, is that not only is everybody watching you and paying attention, but again, every action has a reaction, right? And we want that to be a positive outcome. So when we take it a step further, looking at emotional intelligence, and there's Daniel Goleman, and I think his book, the first emotional intelligence book, which is really good, he also does have a book called Focus. I would recommend that go deeper in these concepts. But again, emotional intelligence is the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions, to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously, and most importantly, empathetically. I think Nanette was speaking to some of this with patrons who come in. So self-awareness drives self-management. When we're aware, we can start to manage ourselves in the moment. And social awareness brings us relationship management. So these are important skill sets. And if we dive a little bit deeper into each, all the way on the left starts with you, emotional self-awareness. Then we can move into these self-management opportunities. From there, once we have that self-management, now we can get into that social awareness. That's understanding not what's just happening in front of us as a patron, but what's happening in the library as a whole in that moment, but still being completely connected to that person in front of you. And now we're into relationship management, which are core leadership competencies you'll see: influence, coach and mentor, conflict management, teamwork, and inspirational management. So to take the principles a step further, we have a mindful leadership model, and this model was developed over the last 5 years of working in both nonprofits. I work in social enterprise organizations. I work in some traditional for-profit organizations, and then also one-on-one with individuals. What I started to see was no matter the challenge, so some of the things you brought up earlier around like change management, digital literacy, all these things, this path can be applied. And an example would be just preparing for today. I took myself through this path. So the first thing is we just want to be aware. And we kind of alluded to it. This is the hardest step of the whole model, is hitting that pause button. And we'll talk about what robs us of the ability to do this in a moment. But just being present and still and connected, like awake. Nanette was talking about this, being awake and really listening. Because once we're aware and have hit the pause button, now we can pay attention. And judgment-free, we want to be listening and compassionate. And when we're really connected with somebody, we have that opportunity. When we are reactive and distracted, we can't be this. It's impossible. From there, we can move into intention. What's my intention in this moment? What is my intention for this week? What is my intention with this project? What's the impact? What's the outcome I'm after? Once we have that clear, now we can take action. And authentic, courageously take action. And this is where mental flow states come in. And we're going to drop into each of these in a moment. But what I want to offer you guys is that as you practice this, this is building a new muscle in your brain, laying down some new neural pathways. It takes a lot of intention and practice. And then you'll start to notice as you do this, you can observe yourself later or in the moment and, oh, wow, I just hit that pause button. Now I'm really paying attention here. And I'm thinking about what I really want out of this and how we can both collectively get an outcome and take a more informed action. And really all of this is the path to being present in your authentic voice and courage. That's what this all allows for. And again, these are important leadership competencies. So let's just dive into each one. So if we start with the first one, awareness, it really is about must be present to win. So distractions minimized, centered in clarity and focus, aligned with the present moment, and sensing the environment. Sounds easy, right? And what I like to offer is that these things are simple, but not easy. Because again, there's an environment that is set to keep us out of this. So I want to talk a little bit about awareness and presence and attention spans. And so Microsoft did this study, and they studied attention span over time. So in the year 2000, they had captured that the human attention span was 12 seconds, and in 2013, it had dropped to 8 seconds. Now, the goldfish has an attention span of 9 seconds, so human beings now have a shorter attention span than a goldfish. The squirrel is 1 second, so at least we're still better than the squirrel. The scary news is that we're headed towards the squirrel's attention span really quickly. I have a niece who's 13 years old. Her generation who grew up with devices, their attention spans have now been identified as 4 seconds. Now, the difference is with their generations, their brains have faster processing speeds also because they've always been in this environment. So their brains are kind of keeping up with all the switching, unlike us older generations who all of this is new for us, so it's not as easy. Our brains haven't adapted. And we have this multitasking myth that especially if there's a lot of females on the call, women have traditionally, self-included, worn this as a badge of honor, right? I can do a lot of things at once, and especially as mothers, that becomes kind of required of us, and it's a skill that does take over as important. But the reality is we cannot do more than one thing at a time. And I love this graphic that I think really says it well. My brain has too many tabs on it open. Not just does our computer have a lot of tabs open simultaneously, but our brains are then multitasking at a rate that is really impossible to be present and connected as we want to be to get the outcomes that we're seeking. And Nanette, I think you wanted to share something personal about this.
Yeah, I had this happen just this week, actually, as we were or last Friday, as we were getting to the dry run for the presentation today, as I'm switching jobs. So I have been in services, and I'm moving into product at Innovative. So I have lots of, the urge is to, I am female, I am a mom, so, the urge is to multitask. But I get frustrated personally. That increases my stress level because the task of development and the task of curriculum design, those are deep thinking tasks. So multitasking, constant slacks, lots of emails, those pieces coming in really are don't make deep thinking not possible, at least for me. And what I realized is, wait, I have a way for dealing with this. And instead of looking at all of this coming in as pressure, and so I did my pause, I stepped away, and I don't meditate, I'll be honest. I pray, and I stepped away and did that. There's many ways to get to mindfulness, which is why I throw out that example. But it's, finding that peace, centering yourself. And I came back and I realized, wait a minute, I love this job. I love and enjoy what I work with, where I work. And so my perspective coming back from that mindful time out I gave myself was, wait, I want to do each and every one of these things. There's not something here I don't enjoy. With that refreshed perspective, then I could come back and say, okay, these are my top priorities. I have to do deep thinking today so I can be present in transitioning some tasks and designing. It changed the tone of my emails. It changed how I responded to people. And in the end, now that I'm 4 days into that, I got more done.
Yeah.
But earlier in my career, I wouldn't have approached that situation that way at all. I would have kept multitasking to try to make as many people happy at that moment. But then a response doesn't necessarily make them happy or let them do their jobs. It just is a response.
Great. And I think you honed in on something super important about all of this is you've gotten more done in the last 4 days since you got present and focused and kind of stepped back and took a look at the big picture. And I think this is the thing that we tell ourselves is we don't have time to slow down. And yet, by slowing down, we create time. And it's counterintuitive. And it takes a lot of discipline to force yourself to take a step back out of the minutia and all the things coming at you and wanting to dip into all of them simultaneously. And, I have one client who said, I've set myself up. I respond to emails so fast that now that's the expectation I've created, right? We don't have to respond to email the moment it comes in, right? That's a choice. And if we can take that step back, like Nanette's saying, what's possible in terms of having a more clear response to the email that then reduces the work and time necessary to process and understand what we're all doing. There's an interesting study that came out like 5 years ago, and they studied the brain and the impact of multitasking on the brain's processing. And what they found was that our IQ level drops when we are multitasking more points than it drops when we smoke marijuana. So that's how much we're dumbing ourselves down when we think we're doing what's demanded and commanded and necessary. We're actually reducing our brain's processing power. And so hopefully that gives you some insight into why to just hit that pause button. We're going to read kind of a couple of, and then that's going to help me here, definitions to help kind of really demonstrate this. So presence, the definition from the dictionary is existing or occurring now, the state or fact of existing, occurring, or being present in a place or thing. And some synonyms are existence, being there. Nanette.
Distraction, a thing that prevents someone from giving full attention to something else. Synonyms, diversion, interruption, disturbance, interference, hindrance, a distraction from the real issues. 2, Distraction is extreme agitation of the mind or emotions. Synonyms: frenzy, hysteria, mental distress, madness, insanity, mania. He knew she was nervous by her uncharacteristic air of distraction.
So just reading that definition, what happens for you?
For me? It makes me want to step away and get that focus to come back from my email. I mean, I had right the, quote, Freudian slip. It's not a synonym. I said symptom instead of synonym.
Yeah. And what I know, it's just the definition shift the energy. Like, I try to read presence quickly, but there's still a clarity around it, a calm that comes when you just are with this definition versus kind of the harried, kind of, I love frenzy, hysteria, mental distress that comes from distraction. And so there's an interesting, I'm going to give you guys a few hacks, but one hack can be is just when you find yourself, like you just said, in this space, you can just choose. I'm going to choose presence. And by shifting your energy, you then shift your mental clarity. Right in the moment, like I say, it's simple, not easy, but it is that simple. There's some really great opportunities here. And I believe we pushed a poll out. Actually, no, it's the next slide is the poll. So it must be present to win. Well, what gets in the way? What are the real threats? We've spoken about some of them. This statistic from the Chopra Center from 2012, another one I'd love to dip in some more recent research, is that our minds are consumed by 60 to 80,000 thoughts per day. So whether that's conscious or not, right, sometimes these are subconscious thoughts that are running. If we really hit that pause button and start observing ourselves, it can be remarkable, the tapes that play in your brain throughout the day, and then the messages that you're telling yourself in those tapes throughout the day, while we're also getting the emails and the text messages and the person asking for our time and all the other interruptions that go on. So the poll is around like what I like to call weapons of mass distraction. So I'm curious what came back on the things that distract you in your day-to-day world and take you out of an ability to be present.
And the poll is up, Kym, and so far devices are leading the way, email. And along with devices, we are seeing people comment that constant alerts pull their concentration away from everything, which is, I can very easily identify because in preparing to moderate these sessions, it's amazing how many things I have to turn off so that I'm not distracted while the hot topics are going on. So devices and technology itself. And then we had a very interesting comment from Victoria, which says boredom is yeah.
So that is the brain wiring. Like and there's a lot of research around that about how these devices are set up to hit our brain chemistry. And so every like on Facebook, every new text message, every new email is releasing those chemicals, whether it's dopamine, serotonin hits, where now we start seeking them out. So sitting and being focused on a task isn't feeding what we've trained our brain's reward system. And so I don't know if you've noticed or you do it yourself, like just constant scrolling, where we're just looking for something to engage us versus us engaging ourselves. Great. It's interesting for me to hear. I didn't want to make an assumption about devices with this population. I worked with manufacturing teams in the past, and so it wasn't theirs, but now that they're using more devices even in manufacturing environments, now they're also victim to this a constant search and have access to it. And so what we want to do, again, is train our brain not to seek out. I read a study last week. We touch our phones over 2,000 times a day now, on average, all generations, average of 2. So now that I'm aware of that study, I'm aware of every time I touch my phone, and I think, wow, well, every time I hit a button to make the next move, that's a touch. So the other thing that's important, and some of the research is that the constant interaction with our devices creates an addiction loop, like I said, for immediate rewards, which then increases our distraction levels, right? And then it also, which is why we're here, threatens our biological capacity to connect with other people. So that's the cost of these devices that, again, those tech companies are really wanting to help us with. So Here, I told you I was going to give you guys some hacks. Here's something to really help with this distraction, and that is I love metaphors, like the metaphor of the book, to help relate and bring things to the forefront for us when we need to. So what I'd love for you guys to do is just take a moment, and you can chat it out if you'd like to, and I'm inviting Nanette to participate in this process also, is to identify a metaphor for your current pace. So some examples are: smooth seas do not make skillful sailors. I actually have that in my signature file for a long time. Squirrel, no rest for the weary. I've heard people use roller coaster, the song roller coaster. It can be a song, but just take a moment. I'm actually going to just give us a moment of quiet here to really think of what's a metaphor for your current pace and the distraction levels that you're operating in. And Nanette, I don't know if you've come up with one for yourself.
I have. I'm going to use today journey. I wouldn't have used this on Friday, but today I'm going to use journey. It's like a road trip, right? Where I'm going from here to Seattle, which is about 4.5 hours, where I have periods of speed, and then I have slowdowns, and hopefully I have a few rest stops. But it's that on-off, right? Variable speeds is my current.
And this sounds like this is the one that you want to be in, right? Or is this the one that
yeah, and it's the one that I've been in this week only because I'm forcing myself to stay in it.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. What was it, if you were to have a metaphor for what it was before, what would you say?
Before
you made this conscious, choice.
I would make it a constant sprint.
Sprint, right? Constant sprint. Yeah, constant sprint. So sprint, yeah, constant sprint. Beautiful. Are we seeing anything come through chat, Ann, on this?
Squirrels. Definitely squirrel has come in a couple of times, Kym. This squirrel, definitely squirrel, very easily distracted, but often to the point of freezing. So squirrel, freezing.
Freezing.
That's freezing,
yeah.
But squirrel came through loud and clear through chat for their current pace. And in a second, I guess, Kym, we're going to ask them about their desired pace.
Yep. So now the invitation is to create a metaphor for the pace that you want. Some of these could be slow and steady wins the race. I had B and C with ease for a couple of years I was using. Nice to be reminded of that. Don't worry, be happy. So, Nanette, it sounds like you've gone from sprint to journey.
Yeah, correct? And I would like it to be more like a triathlon, right? I'd like to be my personal metaphor, I'd like to be well-trained in a diversity of things so that I can, stay focused and have it mapped out, but I'm well-trained and prepared for each.
Nice. Good. Good.
Obviously, I have lots of sports metaphors in my life.
That's okay. Sports metaphors are great. They work well. How do you think coming through chat on this one, Ann?
Yeah, Victoria wants it all, Kym. She wants slow and steady and smooth sailing.
Nice.
Slow and steady is coming in. While other responses are coming in, I'll throw in the personal aside as a long-time librarian. I'm at the point where I think I want don't worry, be happy. It's one of those things, especially having worked on the vendor side of librarianship for so long. But slow and steady wins the race has gotten a couple of wishes, and then, someone else agrees about don't worry, be happy. Thank you for that. Yeah.
And you can create your own. What's cool about this is these are examples, and so, play with this and see what really resonates for your truth. Some people have a lot of fun with songs, too, like Don't Worry, Be Happy. It's a great song that we can relate to, just like Roller Coaster for the other end of that. Wonderful. So here
we have someone chiming in.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, we had someone chime in to me privately. Don't sweat the small stuff. I want to try to, I like that one, right?
Yeah.
That idea of prioritization in somehow, right?
Beautiful.
Being able to put it in buckets.
Good one. Excellent. Love it. Yeah, so here's kind of the invitation, just like those definitions that we read for presence and distracted. When you feel yourself in heavy distraction mode, when you're feeling like you're in that place of sprint or squirrel, right, hit that pause button and then just bring to mind, don't worry, be happy, or smooth sailing, or don't sweat the small stuff. And what will happen is your body will automatically shift, your energy will automatically shift, your brain processing will automatically come into that space. So this is a real opportunity for you guys to practice some of what we're talking about so that you can show up as a more mindful leader, because I'm telling you that if you can't get the pause button down, the rest of it's impossible. So here's a little thing for you to try and play with, and we're going to remind you at the end between now and our session next week so that you can see how this works for you guys, okay? So principle number 2, let's talk about attention. And really this is about, again, focusing on what really matters. Now that we're in this place of don't sweat the small stuff or the triathlon, now we can be listening and compassionate and just really paying attention. So it's observing the landscape. This has been referenced a few times. Engage with your own personal triggers and emotions and reactions. Again, able to identify what matters most right now, like what is being called for here in this moment, and discovering the truth judgment-free. So if we look at this, now that I have your attention, when we're present, we can simply observe. And that's the invitation I just gave to all of you, is observe how you do with these metaphors, because once you're in them and choosing to hit the pause button, now you can see what's happening. And when we simply observe, we can check our perspectives. And when I say perspectives, I mean assumptions, stories that we bring and project onto situations that aren't necessarily appropriate, triggers and judgments. And we can start to identify more resonant options. And one thing I want to offer here is that I had a really challenging relationship with someone in the workplace, and I found the person to be toxic and really impossible to work with. And, you know, I was all about victim, right? I'm showing up and she's making it hard for me to do my job, and there's just this intensity and this competitiveness and all these stories, right, about her and who she was and how she was messing up my world. I read an amazing book that I didn't think I was going to speak about, but it's called Leadership and Self-Deception. And basically it really is about kind of dealing with our own triggers and stories. And what I decided to do is every time I had to go to a meeting with this person, I would bring to my mind a whiteboard that was filled with all the history that she and I had, all the muck, all the frustration, all of her transgressions. And then I would imagine myself wiping that whiteboard clear, erasing all of it. And then I would walk into the meeting. And somehow, by me making that personal change, she changed. And I think the reality of that is I was walking with all my armor, my negative energy, and my projections of how I expected her to behave. And by projecting it onto her, I proved myself right about her every time. When I was able to erase that past, it invited her to show up differently. And while we never became best friends or anything like that, this is me, you know, it starts with you. This is me taking ownership of that relationship and finding a way out. So I think that there's a lot to gain there. When we challenge our perspectives, we also access a whole world between black, white, yes, no, either or thinking, which those kinds of ways of viewing the world trap us and keep us stuck. So when we can challenge it, being attention, then a whole kaleidoscope, I say, of opportunities presents itself. So Anne is putting out a poll now about where you guys feel like you are in your ability to just pay attention, and it really comes from first the ability to be present. But on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you guys think you are in kind of your attention quality?
Okay. They're coming in, Kym, and right now we have some who are between 6 and 7.
That's pretty good.
4 maybe, and then someone who says they're probably between 5 and 6. So we're sort of in the middle, and or as the high blood pressure check at the doctor's office, that you're on the low side of normal or the middle. Oh, we have an 8.
We have excellent.
Oh, yeah. We now the scale is being tilted because we have 7 and 8 checking in.
Okay.
Yeah,
so I would love for the 7 and the 8. We'll move on. But if you guys can chat out for everybody else, like what you believe allows you to be at a 7-8, because I think that's really, really good. I think a 10 can become impossible. You don't want to chase perfection here. So, yeah, what's allowing for that 7, that 8? Share that with your colleagues. I think that would be really helpful. So the other thing that's possible when we're focused on what really matters is we have ability, and Nanette references too, to listen at a different level. And we're going to dive into these 3 levels of listening more deeply in our next session. But I want to introduce them to you here, and I want you to think about, as I go through them, what they might mean in translation. So at level 1, internal listening, it's all about me. This is how most people show up to interactions, unless they are really disciplined, especially in the workplace. So they're thinking about what they're going to say. They're thinking about how it affects them. It's me, 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 me. They're thinking about what they're going to have for lunch, maybe. And then we go to level 2, which is other-centered listening, which is it's all about you. So now I'm completely immersed, kind of like the book. It's only about you. It's not about me at all. And that's really appropriate when we're doing things like coaching other people and really focus on helping them get better, or if you're mentoring, things of that nature. But what we're really going for is level 3, and that's integrated listening. And that is, it's all about us. And so that gets back to that system level. So now I'm listening, I'm thinking about what you're saying, its effect on us as our own entity instead of you and me. It's us collaboratively integrated. And again, we're going to spend some time on these more deeply next week. So attention, this is where we get to show up in a whole different way. And so once we have attention, now we want to look at our intention. So what are we after here? And I just want to share that purpose and values are key on this. Number 1, and I reference this in my introduction. So we're focused on impact, mission, vision, values. We have management of the self and the ego here. We are fully in relationship with other. That's being in that level 3. And we're truly seeking the best possible outcomes. So what does that look like? I'm curious if anybody here is familiar with Simon Sinek and the 3 golden circles. And really his whole research and philosophy is around starting with why. So if we tap into the mission of your library, the mission of your role, this is where intrinsic motivation comes from, and this is what opens up the capacity to get better outcomes. Is we're not focused on the task completion, we're focused on how does the task connect to the greater calling, the mission. Next, we move to how. How are we going to get this done? These are behavioral norms. They're values in action. And then last is what actually happens. Most orientations start with what. What are we going to do? And if we really can always start with that why, our what is going to be much better executed. And this is a really great methodology to use with project management and staying on project, is we tend to get caught up in that 3rd circle. And if we can keep coming back to the mission of the project, it helps answer a lot of questions. And it really gives direction. And when we think about what values are, they are kind of a North Star guideposts of how we're going to behave. And we're going to spend a lot of time on values next week. Simon Sinek also has one of the most watched TED Talks of all time because it is such compelling research. And so I invite you to watch that. And then that's going to send this out so you'll have access to it after today if you miss it right now. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to take a look at the American Library Association's why, because I felt like that's, I don't have all of your individual libraries, nor do I know if you have values that you've identified for your systems, but you get to the bottom line of what librarianship is all about and the institution of libraries. It's to enhance learning and ensure access to information for all. So at the end of the day, everything that you guys are doing should be meeting that end. Now, how are libraries going to accomplish this? This is the values. So if we look again at the ALA, these are the values that have been expressed as important to achieving that mission. Access, confidentiality, privacy, democracy, diversity, education and lifelong learning, intellectual freedom, preservation, the public good, professionalism, service, and last but not least, social responsibility. So what I want you guys to do right now is look at those values and identify one that for you, you feel most aligned with. And if you think about even what you came to this session wanting to work on, or some of the topics you were most interested in, volunteer management, leadership, change management, whatever those things are, I want you to choose one value here that is an access point for you of achieving that end. And I'll try to give you an example. So if I'm stuck in how to handle a business dilemma, I had a client who wanted me to print, 150, multi-page color copies bound, and it wasn't really necessary to what we were up to. And I am a certified green business. So I had to go back to social responsibility and in a nice way work with my client to really challenge what they were asking of me, and also not from a place of arrogance either, or that I'm better than you and have a more important value, but let's think about what we're really doing here and how printing all of this is really going to impact the outcome that we're after. Back to that why, where we were focused was on the what. Nanette, I think you, this is much like your metaphor for speed. I'm curious where you see these being able to tap into these to achieve your goals.
Well, I just recently came back to these. I hadn't seen it as the golden circles, so that's a new one I have to go watch. But the why, how, and what, I see that in my life a lot. And I just recently came back to development, so those are the three questions. I say I'm annoyingly consistent about those three. And for me, in library, you've got the answer. I started out in publishing, and I have been in library exclusively since 2006. I am not an MLIS. I am a library technologist. And the funny part about it is we were just last week in a conference room explaining to a new vendor working with us these values, your hows, if you will. So the why they had, but the hows, and everybody around the table starts laughing because they said, uh-oh, here comes the librarian. And the how that I picked was service, I explained all of the others through service, and that's probably appropriate that I work at a vendor and that I'm a system developer type. But how the system convenes of service and describing it from that perspective. So.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I'm curious, Anne, what you're seeing come through in the chat on this one in terms of just where the audience feels aligned and which they think they could pull as a lever to help them achieve a goal.
Access and service are the leaders here, Kym. We have access that provides both information and entertainment to their users, but access is leading, followed closely behind by service. Those are the two that came through.
Great.
Yes, and various flavors, but.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I think that the opportunity here is to this is a perspective shifting opportunity. So when you're in a situation where you feel stuck, just put on the lens of service and what it really means for you. And often that can just help you get unstuck because you're tapping into another part of your brain and just looking at it through a different lens than maybe what has kept you stuck. So that's something I want to offer you guys, again, as another way to get out of kind of the minutia and above it, if you will. We talk about millennials a lot, and there's a real important reason why, as we said earlier, because they're a large part of the U.S. population, and they're going to be, you know, most of the workforce population very soon. And so when we look at the statistics from this study, we see that, you know, on the lower left, less value is placed on things that leaders have, you know, prided themselves on for decades. And, you know, people don't want to follow leaders who are focused on this. I think if you all put yourselves, even regardless of your generation, it may or may not be true, but we typically, much like the Amy Cuddy work as well, what gets us to follow somebody and trust somebody? We want visionaries. We want strategic thinkers. We want people who inspire us every day. We want them to have really strong interpersonal skills, and passion and decisiveness is really important. So this gets back to having these skill sets and how you define yourself as a leader, showing up in a way that demonstrates those softer skills again. I think you guys have some webinars on engagement coming up also, and I'm guessing it's going to tap into some of this, because really this is about how you really shift, you know, how you approach not only, you know, the workforce, but also your patrons again. They're looking for something different. And I think what's interesting here too is your patrons want to know about the impact that you're making when they choose to come to your library. If you are only giving them technical solutions, that's wonderful, and yet for you to really create engagement and to have connection and leadership in a higher way, connecting them to your mission, vision, and values is important. And if you haven't defined those for your library specifically, you know, I invite you to either just, you know, link these for your workforce and yourselves, or, you know, come up with your own with your team so that everybody's clear that we're on the same path, we're clear on our why, we're clear on how we're going to get there, so that the what just becomes easier. So I'm going to move into number 4, the last of the model, the last stage, and it's really the principle of letting aligned action flow. So what's true about all of this is that if we nail awareness, attention, and intention, the action is just happens, right? There's no thinking. It just is. And this is where I love flow states, and if we, I don't know how many of you have studied flow, but what we're looking at is, you know, passion's activated, collaborative in spirit, courageous when called, and we can be courageous when called when we're really clear on our values and our mission, because there's no external pressures that are getting in the way of our courage. And we have aligned performance. So flow is when, somebody mentioned boredom earlier, and flow states happen when our skill is being utilized at the right level, high, and when our challenge is also at a high level. Okay, that's where flow states come from. And you see around that are emotions and energies. So what this model offers us an opportunity to, and I bring back the book metaphor, is just like when you're immersed in that book, we get to go into flow states when we're really tapped into our intrinsic motivators, which is what this is all about. And so ease happens. So it's really about being fully immersed in a feeling of energized focus, full involvement, and enjoyment in the process or activity. That's it. And there's a TED Talk here, not one of the most watched, but it does a good job of demonstrating what flow states are and how to tap into them. And there's a lot of projects and research going on about this because, again, we're at work what percentage of the time? And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could be in this passion state the majority of our time at work? This is a path to getting there. And the other thing that I want to offer for you is this courage when called. And I'm curious for you, Nanette, I'm going to put you on the spot here. I don't think that I planned this. But when you think about mindful leadership in the model, like what opportunities are afforded when we step outside our comfort zone? What do you find is true?
It's so funny you say that because my coffee cup this morning is John Wayne, and I'm not saying he's a mindful leader, but the statement that I read every time I take a drink is, courage is being scared to death but saddling up anyway. And I remember that, right? My comfort zone is one thing, but magic happens just outside of it. And if I'm centered, then I can overcome my fear. And that's always been the big piece for me is how it, right, because the stress for me was coming from fear, that I wouldn't perform or, you know, that I wouldn't be able to motivate the team. So that's just one of those little tag lines that I have. I also have this other one in front of my desk that says, obviously I like cowboys and I live rurally, and I like cowgirls even better. And it's a cowgirl that says, well-behaved women rarely make history, which isn't that I'm rude and I don't have manners. Cowgirls and cowboys in my world are respectful, and mindful leadership helps me, mindful practices help me remain respectful, but also color outside the lines when appropriate, because that's where the magic happens too.
Beautiful. And they also help you be respected, I think, too. Like these women who make history are well respected because they are stepping outside their comfort zone. They are taking a stand for something. And I think that as a leader, when we play it safe, it does not make for a workforce that wants to follow you. In fact, respect starts to wane because they view it as political or apathetic or whatever is creating that outcome. It's not really leadership. We're going to play with this more in the next session, and what I want to offer is oftentimes, like you said, it's fear, right, that keeps you sometimes in the safety zone. And what we want to think about is, you know, ways to build this muscle is by taking small steps, low-risk steps that we can practice to say, well, that wasn't so bad. And every time we maybe take a little step outside, and we prove that, okay, so nothing really bad happened that I thought would, it actually builds our capacity and our resilience to create more risk. The other thing that I think is important to note here is that it's being in the 3 stages of this model allows you to be courageous in a more confident way, because you are really clued into what the system's calling for, what you're being called towards, and you're really aligned with your values. What happened with my role when I was starting to absence, because I was being asked to be an inauthentic leader, then I was way safe in hiding because it wasn't who I was. Once I could go back into my full, authentic leadership and how I feel called in the world, then I could be more courageous because, again, I was willing to take risks and deal with the consequences, and that was okay. I felt resilient and capable of that. So you have to practice this in ways that work for you, I think is really what's important here. You know, you don't want to go out and do something drastic tomorrow and see how it goes. It's what are some small steps you can take to be in this space. So we went through the model today. Hopefully you're seeing how this model can bring you more presence, voice, and courageous action. What we're really going to be tapping into and what we're talking about is what Gallup finds creates great leaders. They motivate every single employee to take action and engage employees with a compelling mission and vision. They have the assertiveness, kind of like those well-behaved women, not well-behaved women in the story. They have the assertiveness to drive outcomes and the ability to overcome adversity and resistance. They create a culture of clear accountability. So we sometimes can make up that mindfulness is something that's so soft that how we know results are happening. Mindfulness and results and high performance go together. And when you are a mindful leader and clear, people understand what's expected of them, and they understand the consequence when they don't meet those expectations. They build relationships that create trust, open dialogue, and full transparency, and they make decisions based on productivity, not politics. 2.5 million people participated in this study to come up with these are the traits. So we'll be talking about these talents more next time. And with that, high performance is the proven payoff. I want to get you guys started with the challenge. We spoke about both of these. The first is to work on presence starting today. So tapping into the metaphor for the pace that you want. That's the invitation. And the second is to try on the model and try to apply it to a real scenario. So let's say you're stuck or you have a conflict with somebody. The model is really great for conflict management because just like that story I told you, wiping that whiteboard with that one individual, like when you can get present and really curious about that other person, see what magic can happen there. So those are the invitations. I think Anne just spent out the challenge. I'd love to hear if anybody's taking the challenge. Challenge accepted. This is like that opportunity to go outside the comfort zone, really, and name that you're going to practice something.
We have commitments, Kym, to start working on presence today and every day going forward. We have others who are saying they're going to finish one task before they start another. They're only going to answer emails at designated times throughout the day rather than when they come in. I mean, it's really deep in putting practice in. And then it'd also be interesting, Kym, because earlier we had a chat to come in on the soft skills and everything. So I think the challenge is going to be very interesting because in that one of those final chats it said that it was difficult to develop soft skills because of the rapid changing skills required to keep up with the technology. So that's going to be very interesting to see if they can accept the challenge here and how they move forward with that. Have comments too, Kym. It says awesome was the word used to describe both the concepts and the challenges presented today.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yep.
And I like that you were just sharing too about, you know, the real test of the technology challenging us to make time, and it really is about a choice. And Annette alluded to this. I will tell you on the days that I approach the day from, I'm going to really get on top of the day. Is it plan your work your plan? I think there's another saying that I can't come up with right now about, you know, being the master of your day and just taking 15 minutes at the beginning of the day to get centered, make a to-do list. I also practice some gratitude to get my attitude in the right frame of mind. The day just flows so much better, and I get so much more done, and it's a 15-minute investment, and I'm guilty of it too. There's days where I say, oh, no, I got to get on that email. I got to see, oh, no, I got a text message, and it just hijacks the whole day. So this is a discipline. It's a practice, and I'm glad that you guys are willing to try it on. And
yeah, and it's
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. We had one more that came in that I think also is reflective of the group that was assembled today, because we've looked at information, we've received chats and comments from both sides of the library world, if you will, both from the technical side, because we had a system coordinator who checked in and said that, you know, his responsibilities including making certain that staff had access to data as well as patrons. And then finally, in terms of one of the challenges that has been accepted is the active listening to both staff and patrons. So our mindful management is extending beyond just our staff, but also to the patrons we serve.
Love it. Thank you. Awesome. So I think now's an opportunity if anybody has any specific questions. Next week, what we're going to do is we're going to go to each of the four, and then we're going to practice a little more deeply and really start connecting it personally for you guys. Any questions out there?
I don't see any questions yet, but I will. This is Nana. I have a comment. I love your point about making those 15 minutes in the morning. That's one of the things that I learned to practice. That's actually the first mindful skill I was taught. And what I think is interesting is exactly what you said, right? That end of the day, if I have not done that, that's when I feel most stressed. Right? So that end of the day survey back, it's just that one simple discipline, but we all find ways and reasons not to do it. And it's like, you know, I don't know, the Simpsons character, the Homer, hitting himself on the head and saying, "Oh, if I'd have only, you know, paused the 15 minutes at the beginning of the day, how much differently would this have occurred?"
Yeah, I mean, it's so
we're all
remarkable.
Human. We have to get back to it.
Yeah, and it's remarkable how easy it is to observe once you make a point of observing. And that's where, again, you want to talk about reward systems and brain chemistry when you can connect to, wow, I got so much done. I was really in flow that day. I was feeling positive. Now you're creating a different type of wiring or reward hit, but then the next day when you're thinking about, yeah, I don't have time for that 15 minutes, it's kind of like, I don't have time to go look at Facebook, but I'm still going to. I don't have time for that 15 minutes, but I'm still going to.
Oh, you picked my favorite distraction.
Oh, yes, they are the masters, I do believe. And they do also have mindfulness. They have a lot. They actually have a really interesting mindfulness program there called Search Inside Yourself Leadership Program. And I think that's really, like I said earlier, the people who are creating the distractions are also working hard to ensure their employees aren't victims. No questions?
I don't have any questions coming in. Ann, do you?
Nope, all clear on this end.
Okay, so should we move to the close minute?
Yeah, we'll move through the close, and we'll do the best part of a good training session or meeting, right, which is we'll get you out of here 5 minutes early. So
we can go
if you want to pass the next slide. Yeah, I just want to remind you all to join us again. We do have a new series with our new, my boss and our new SVP of product strategy here at Innovative, and her name is Catherine Harnish, and she is doing a series, Follow the Leader, Innovative in the Future of Libraries. And if you missed the session a couple weeks ago, you will see on our website that you can download and watch it, and it will tell you a little bit how we're responding here to this, the challenges that we've been talking about as part of mindful leadership. I also want to remind you to sign up for session 2. If you haven't, please sign up for session 2. And Kym is right, in January, our topic is engagement. So we move from mindful leadership into engagement. The two are very connected. And then we move from engagement in February into metadata in our hot topic. So the leadership process, the way we use it with our patrons, and then to my way of thinking, and granted I'm biased, I'm a metadata geek, but the way that we control that and aid that through our system. I hope that you'll also consider joining us for our boot camps, which take these in depth and detail. I hope you'll watch our site for Mindful Leadership and Staff Development Boot Camp, which is coming soon if you'd like to dig deeper with Kym and our consultants in a 4-week boot camp for really practical application. We hope that you'll join us for that. I'll make my pitch for my favorite subject, metadata. We have done that one once, and we'll be repeating it. I hope that you join us for that. And we will have a mini session of that at IUG if you go to our IUGs. And then Knowledge Lifecycle Bootcamp. All of these are taught by, so that's about your access and IP lifecycle service. All of these are taught by feet-on-the-street outside experts like Kym and experienced III consultants who have been there and done that. And hopefully we do it well, right, with our mindful leadership hats on. There will be others added, and you can check out the III site for the full list and the times, dates, and costs. So that's my little sign up here bird. You'll see that on our Innovative website. We have a drop down for workshops, and you can go to our new registration site, although I suppose it's not quite as new. It's a couple months. It's been out for a couple months if you've not used it. You can click and get the details, and you can actually do your purchasing right online, be that for immediate pay or purchase order. And I promised 5 minutes early, so is that my last slide? I can't remember. I have one more. So my one more slide is we really encourage your feedback. Obviously, we've got a lot of changes going on here. Our hot topics were new. They started in August. We have new boot camps. We have new products and services. We really want to hear what you think, be it in product with Catherine and I and others that you're familiar with, or be it in services with Ann and Jean and Caitlin and the folks that you're accustomed to dealing with there. And of course, there's always your account rep. So please don't hesitate. You will be getting an email from us with contact information. And again, that feedback form, we'd love to hear what you thought about today's session in detail and how we can continue helping you. And with that, I will end the session 6 minutes early, wishing you a wonderful day and hoping that we see you next